So there you are, a lad from the northeast of England, coming from Brexit-backing family. Your father's side's Labour, your mum's side's Conservative, but both those sides of the family supported Brexit. And you're working now at the Financial Times, who wanted us to join the euro.
Your favourite paper.
Well, I mean, look...
You have a soft spot for it, Nigel.
Well, I have to read something to make me laugh, you know, because they're wrong about everything, aren't they? I mean, you're working for a newspaper whose views are completely different to your background.
But I think the thing with the FT, I would say, is that I think our straight reporting is very vigorous, and I think we've got correspondents all over the country, and we've had people write on deep social and economic trends in a very clear way. And of course, you know, I thought very hard about the Brexit decision. I wrote about that in Broken Heartlands, and very much so. You know, and I said I spent 20 minutes in the polling booth trying to decide, and I'd actually have to say, I'd done a Boris Johnson. I wrote 2 columns for the FT on that day. I wrote a Brexit one and a Remain one. I sat down with a friend and went through it, and I eventually came to my conclusion, which was to reluctantly vote for Remain, and that column was published. But even then, when I went into the ballot box, I really thought quite hard about it, but I did vote for Remain. But unlike some of my other FT colleagues, I didn't back a second referendum.
Look, I mean, it was, you know, it's been... However, the Financial Times, as a publication online, is a global success story, isn't it?
You see, you heard it here first.
No. I mean, it is doing very well, isn't it?
Yeah, hugely. The FT, you know, we've got over 1.1 million digital subscribers now, plus the print paper. And what's been very interesting is that even when I joined the FT in 2016, it was very much a business-to-business product, you know, for people in the city, in markets, who need to do that. Now, we've got a huge amount of consumer subscribers, you know, ordinary folks who want to read the app, and we've launched a new FT Edit app, which you can get for its £1 a month trial, and you get 8 articles a day, and it's, again, that's doing very well. So it's all gangbusters at the FT.
And of course the great Saturday column, which is Lunch with the FT, which I did do a few years ago.
I remember that. It was very sober, none of these.
It did spark a bit of merriment. But no, it's interesting, Seb, because I mean, your background in the northeast, you know, and I know you lost your father when you were quite young, who sounds like a bit of a sort of Del Boy character.
Absolutely, a lot of wheeling and dealing. The sort of chap I imagine you would have probably got on quite well with.
But you go through education in the northeast of England. Why journalism?
I think so. I actually was obsessed with computers when I was growing up, and I built my first computer when I was 6, and eventually I studied computer science at university. But about halfway through, I realised I actually wasn't that good at it, and I could see there were many people on my degree who were far smarter than I was, and I thought, well, actually, what I'm really interested in is people. And to me, journalism seemed the thing you could do about writing the most about people, what makes them tick. And I'd done a bit of student politics at university, and I'd also done media at university. I ran the radio station at Durham, wrote for the university newspaper. And so when it came to 2010, I did my first ever work experience at The Guardian, in fact, on their desk. And I went there, and I really enjoyed it. And that was when I went straight up into journalism. And, you know, you've gone into journalism, I guess, relatively late, and you know it's fantastically stimulating. You really get to see what makes real people tick and think, as well as what goes on over there.
But what goes on over there with our political class, but there's also a media class, and it's quite interesting. If you actually look now at those on radio, on telly, in the newspapers, online, it is now more dominated by those who come from privileged backgrounds, those who've had, you know, very privileged education. So many have gone to the same university, even got the same degree. Were you a bit of an outsider?
I think so. Well, apart from the fact I used to sound a lot more Geordie than I do now. When I first came to London, you could have put me alongside Anton Deck, I think, whereas when you...
why have you lost it?
Not on purpose. It was just simply when you start doing broadcast and you be surrounded by those media elites you dislike so much, it does sort of soft off your vowels, because Geordies tend to speak very quickly and not necessarily finish their sentences, and when you try to speak more clearly and slowly, it makes you sound a bit less northern. I've never felt like an outsider. I've been very, very lucky to work at some brilliant publications. I worked at The Spectator, The Daily Telegraph, even The Washington Post, which I'm sure you absolutely love as well as a newspaper, and the FT. And throughout all that time, no one's ever asked about my accent or my background or anything like that. So I actually feel, you know, I wasn't sort of born in the coal bucket, as I write about in the book. I came from a very straightforward middle-class background, that people were very welcoming, and I've had some amazing opportunities. But, you know, I didn't go to Oxbridge. I didn't go to a public school. And I remember one of my former editors said to me, look, every day you're going to be competing with people who have had these amazing top-flight educations, and you've just got to work harder, and that's what you do, you know, and that's one of the reasons why I've travelled a lot to do on-the-ground shoe leather reporting. One of the reasons that...
Which you love doing, don't you? I remember you coming down sort of... You were driving a Mini round the country.
I was,
the 2015
that's right.
general election, I got in the Mini with you. And you really enjoy that, going out and actually meeting folk on the ground.
So I did this when I moved to America in 2014 to work at the Washington Post. I realised they do political journalism entirely differently there to how we do it here. That in America, you know, there are people obviously in DC covering the Senate and the White House, but most political reporters go elsewhere. And every Monday morning at the Washington Post, they'd say, right, what's the theme this week? Immigration, right? Seb, you go to North Carolina. Dave, you go to Florida. And then we put together a big thematic piece. So when I came back to the UK in 2015, I was like, well, why is no one doing that here? You know, everyone is still based in the parliamentary lobby in Westminster, just focused on doing that.
Yeah.
So I did the natural thing, which was to put my savings into buying an Ode Red Mini Cooper, which broke down. It broke down on the way to one of your rallies in South Thanet in 2015. I can remember a rather angry phone call with you to one of your aides at the time saying, where are you? Why didn't you get the train? And you're like, well, I'm stuck at Medway Services. But the reason I love doing that, Nigel, is that a lot of journalists come to things with preconceived ideas about what matters to people, about where politics are going. And I think the only way you can challenge that is by getting out and about.
There's a lot of groupthink in journalism, and that's why nearly everybody misread the Brexit result. And I remember in 2014, 2015, you know, suddenly UKIP's getting 4.5 million votes, 4 million votes. And I remember saying to people, actually, the backbone of the UKIP vote now in a general election is a Labour vote.
Yeah.
Nobody believed me. Nobody understood it. You know, I went and met newspaper editors. Nobody believed it in this London bubble. But in a sense, this book, this rather important book that you've written, Broken Heartlands, and you talk about what's happened to the Labour Party, the disconnect, the deindustrialisation of much of the Midlands, of the North and elsewhere. But it wasn't just Boris in 2019, it was happening in 2014, wasn't it?
It was, and I remember we spoke for the book as well, and you mentioned the Bromley by-election, which you stood in, and that was when Rachel Reeves, who's obviously now Labour Shadow Chancellor, came fourth in that seat, and of course, obviously, Bromley's pretty much as Conservative as they come. But that's extraordinary when you think about it.
But there was a Labour vote there, and they were voting for me. I was the candidate in that by-election. They were voting for me, you know, in numbers that she couldn't believe.
Yes, and I think what happened was, with the big, you know, obviously UKIP's big breakthrough was 2009 in those European elections, combined with, obviously, the concerns about migration and the EU as well. And UKIP, as I wrote about in Broken Heartlands, was a gateway drug towards going towards the Conservatives, because you broke away those people from Labour who were becoming gradually disaffected. It was the direction the party was going. I think Ed Miliband's leadership had an awful lot to do with it, in fact. I think a lot of people looked at Ed Miliband and just thought, he's not a Prime Minister, he doesn't chime with me. But then they obviously looked at you and what your party was putting forward, and they sort of went off in that direction. But the crucial thing was, after the Brexit referendum, those people who went for UKIP, they didn't go back to Labour. They went to the Tories. So again, it was like a staged process. And to those people who say, oh, well, the Red Wall will just go back at the next election, I would say, well, why should it? Because this has been a long process as well. And it's not just these people's views, it's how these places have changed. Because when I was doing the research for Broken Heartlands throughout the pandemic, you know, I was driving around parts of the country I'd never been to, but also parts where I grew up, which I'd not spent a lot of time in over the past decade. And the typical thing for a journalist is to get a train, you go to a town, you go into the Wetherspoons, you find some grumpy people, you do a package saying it's all awful, then you go back off. What I did was drive around, and you could see the new private housing estates, the out-of-town retail parks, you know, in Concert in County Durham, which was home to the famous steelworks. The biggest employer there is now a wine warehouse, and it employs people with Beamers and Audis, and the steelworkers didn't have Beamers and Audis for sure. So the theory that I came to was, these places have been trending away economically from Labour, and that disaffection which started where they went to UKIP was completed when Boris had that "Get Brexit Done" slogan.
Yeah, I mean, they've left that tribal route. The question is, they may not all switch back to Labour, and I get that, but I do also think, separate to the Brexit issues, the border issues, the London disconnect issues, oh, and the contempt Labour treated them with, sending Peter Mandelson to Hartlepool, sending David Miliband to South Shields. I mean, this was the Labour Party saying, the North East's our backyard, we can put anyone we want up there, and they did, I think, get treated a bit for that. arrogance, really, rather than complacency. But I just wonder. Jeremy Corbyn was a factor too, I think, in 2019.
Oh, huge. You know, it was because
he wasn't patriotic.
And one of the things about these Red Wall seats is the fact that a lot of them have very strong connections to the armed forces, that a lot of them have army bases, but also the sons of those families go often to the armed forces. And when you saw Mr Corbyn's attitude on the police, the shoot-to-kill thing, but also his response to various terror attacks, you know, if you were sort of doing a Lady Bird book on a candidate to lose the Red Wall, it would be Jeremy Corbyn. Every single thing about him just went exactly about what you would do to lose those seats. Now, obviously, Keir Starmer is very different in a sense because, yes, you know, you would probably describe him as part of the Islington lawyer class, if I was to take words out of your mouth, but he's very tough on law and order. Former Director of Public Prosecutions, and has been wrapping himself in the Union Jack. You know, every time Labour gives a press conference, they've almost got more flags than Liz Truss does.
Wow, that's saying something, isn't it?
It is.
Gosh, has he got an Instagram account as well? I expect he probably has.
It might not be the most interesting Instagram account you could see.
No, I'm sure it wouldn't be. So they're trying very hard. Do the tour, in your view, if the election was going to be this Thursday, there were two by-elections, of course, this Thursday. If the election was this Thursday, would Boris keep the Red Wall?
I think he would keep a chunk of it, but not all of it. And one of the things I defined in the book is there are two types of Red Wall seats. There's the very urban ones, which includes Wakefield. And when I spent time in Wakefield, I actually concluded that chapter by saying that's one of the ones that will probably just flip back because it's quite urban, it's got quite a diverse makeup, its economy is quite different, whereas the more rural ones, for example, Burnley and Lancashire, that's one that's much more difficult. If there was an election tomorrow, I reckon maybe... could 40%, maybe 50% of them would stay with the Tories? But I think there's not an election tomorrow. There's 2 more years. And we'll have to really see, can Boris Johnson deliver on levelling up? Because he made a pledge to those voters on the steps of Downing Street. He said, look, you've put your trust in me, I'm going to deliver that trust. And, you know, they're building some new hospitals and some new roads and some new railways. But fundamentally... they've not delivered the high expectations he put forward.
No, they haven't.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.